Imagine two Microsoft 365 consultants who look identical on paper. They hold the same certifications, operate in the same market, and possess a deep architectural understanding of Entra, Teams, and SharePoint that most organizations will never fully grasp. Both of them can implement complex security frameworks, and both understand the inevitable decay of unmanaged governance. One of these consultants spends their days negotiating price and waiting for projects to finally materialize. They are constantly struggling to maintain margins while dealing with clients who treat their expertise like a commodity. These clients shop around, compare hourly rates, and demand discounts because they see the work as a replaceable utility. The other consultant has a different experience entirely. Their phone rings with clients asking when the engagement can actually start rather than how much it will cost. The difference here is not a matter of technical skill or platform knowledge, it is a matter of service design. This episode deconstructs why most Microsoft 365 consulting inevitably collapses into commodity work and how you can build a service architecture that clients actually compete to hire. The consulting trap: why technical excellence doesn't guarantee demand. Here is the uncomfortable truth. Technical excellence is not a differentiator. Most Microsoft 365 consultants make the foundational mistake of selling activities. They sell inputs, implementation tasks, and the work itself. They market deployment, governance workshops, and security hardening as the product. These are merely activities rather than outcomes, and that distinction matters because it determines whether a client views you as a premium partner or just another vendor. When you sell activities, you force the client to compare you to every other firm selling those same tasks. They begin to scrutinize your hourly rates, project timelines, and immediate availability. They benchmark your pricing against 3 other firms and negotiate because they see no structural difference in the offering. They defer decisions, wait for budget cycles, and eventually ask for discounts or look toward offshore alternatives. This cycle of constant negotiation and margin pressure is the natural result of selling hours and deliverables instead of business transformations. The trap is that deep technical skill creates a false sense of security for the architect. You might be highly certified and have implemented Microsoft 365 for hundreds of organizations, but from the client's perspective, that experience only proves you are competent. Competence is simply table stakes in this industry. Your certifications prove you likely won't break the tenant, but they do not prove you will create measurable value for the business. If you sell your services based on your expertise, you are competing in a commodity market where margins are being compressed every single day. More consultants enter the space every year, more offshore firms compete on price, and more tools automate the very tasks you used to charge for. The slow sales cycles and the pressure to lower your rates are not actually client problems. They are design omissions. These are symptoms of a service model that was architected for commoditization from the very beginning. Most consultants build a practice around their personal knowledge by positioning themselves as SharePoint architects or Copilot adoption specialists. They lead with their credentials and wait for the market to recognize how much they know. But the reality is that clients do not care about your knowledge. Clients care about certainty and the reduction of risk. They want to know if an engagement will solve a specific pain point that is costing them money or security right now. When you sell activities, you are asking the client to take a risk by converting your time and effort into some vague future value. Because that value is uncertain, the client protects themselves by negotiating the price down and looking for cheaper options. When you sell outcomes, the conversation shifts from cost to transformation. You are no longer selling a governance workshop. You are selling the elimination of uncontrolled team sprawl and the reduction of IT overhead by 30%. You are promising a deterministic result where compliance violations disappear. The difference is the underlying service architecture. One model is designed to be sold on hourly rates, which leads to architectural erosion and low margins. The other is designed to be sold on outcomes, which allows you to command a premium. Moving from one to the other is not a simple mindset shift. It is a structural redesign of everything you offer. What clients actually buy, not what you think you're selling. Most organizations do not buy technology, and ignoring this uncomfortable truth is why most consulting engagements eventually suffer from architectural erosion. Your clients are not actually looking to purchase Microsoft 365, SharePoint architecture, or a collection of governance frameworks and security policies. In reality, they are buying certainty, the reduction of systemic risk, and specific business outcomes that justify their capital expenditure. The foundational mistake is that consultants sell activities instead of those outcomes. You might tell a client you will implement SharePoint governance or deploy Teams lifecycle management, but those are merely inputs and things you do. Because these activities focus on the how rather than the why, they fail to address the underlying pain the organization is trying to solve. This creates a massive gap where friction originates during the delivery phase. When a consultant hears a client ask for better SharePoint governance, they usually interpret this as a technical configuration problem to be solved with policy. They design the model, document the settings, train the IT staff, and finish the project on time, yet the client remains unsatisfied despite the checklist being complete. That distinction matters because what the client actually wanted was an intranet that employees would actually use to find information. They were looking for a system where documents are organized logically and content remains relevant, serving as a single source of truth that replaces the chaos of searching through Gmail, Teams, and personal OneDrives. The consultant delivered a set of rules, but the client needed a functional outcome that the rules failed to produce. We see this same pattern of conditional chaos repeat whenever an organization asks for Teams governance. The consultant focuses on naming conventions, channel creation rights, and archival rules, delivering a perfectly configured technical container that misses the point entirely. What the client actually wanted was controlled collaboration that prevents the platform from becoming a sprawling, unmanageable mess where projects vanish the moment a team member leaves the company. With Copilot, the architectural misunderstanding is identical. A consultant might design a brilliant deployment strategy involving licensing audits and adoption dashboards, but the client is actually looking for measurable productivity gains. They want their knowledge workers to spend less time on routine tasks and more time on strategic decisions, which means they need to see faster decision cycles and higher quality outputs to justify the investment. When you deliver activities while the client is waiting for results, the value of your service begins to degrade. The client eventually notices that the governance model exists, but information is still impossible to find, or that the Copilot rollout happened but nobody knows how to use it. This gap leads to price negotiations, questioned value, and a general feeling that your service is a commodity that could be replaced by a cheaper vendor. If you reverse the frame, a client with clear outcomes in mind will almost always pay premium pricing for architectural certainty. Someone who needs to save 14 minutes of daily productivity per user is willing to invest significantly if you can prove your method makes that outcome inevitable. Outcomes have inherent value while activities only have costs, and understanding this distinction is the first step toward designing services that organizations actually compete to hire. The 5-element framework for high-value services. The difference between a commodity service and a premium one comes down to 5 structural elements that function as the architecture of your offer. These are not marketing slogans or positioning statements, but rather the core components that determine whether your work will be devalued or command a high price. If you miss even one of these elements, your service will drift toward the commodity market where you are forced to compete on hourly rates. Element 1, a painful problem. High-value services are always built on painful existing problems rather than hypothetical improvements or nice-to-have features. You must focus on issues that are costing the organization money right now, creating immediate security risks, or keeping the executive leadership awake at night. In the Microsoft 365 ecosystem, these problems often remain invisible until they transform into full-blown operational crises. You might see governance chaos, uncontrolled Teams creation, or sprawling SharePoint sites that have no lifecycle management, meaning nobody knows where data lives or who has access to it. This leads to massive security exposure, misconfigured permissions, and compliance risks where retention policies are never enforced and e-discovery becomes a nightmare. Your job as an architect is to surface these problems and define them before they become visible disasters. When you articulate a problem the client recognizes, such as expensive licenses being underutilized or employees using shadow IT, you earn the right to sell the solution. Pain creates the urgency required to move a project forward, and that urgency usually makes difficult pricing conversations disappear entirely. Element 2, a clear outcome. A high-value service promises a total transformation of the environment rather than a list of technical tasks. You must state the outcome in business terms, which means moving away from implementing governance and toward eliminating team sprawl to reduce IT overhead by 30%. Instead of offering to audit licenses, you should promise to optimize the SKU mix and eliminate waste to save the client 20% on their next renewal. You are not just preparing them for Copilot, you are enabling 80% of their staff to use the tool productively within 90 days. This level of specificity increases trust and allows the client to calculate the actual return on their investment. Element 3, a defined methodology. A methodology is a proven, repeatable process that reduces the perceived risk of the engagement. When a client sees that you are using a tested approach rather than inventing a solution on the fly, their confidence in the final result increases. Your method should follow a logical flow from assessment and architecture to design and adoption, with each phase having its own defined deliverables and success criteria. Methodology signals deep experience and suggests that the outcome is a deterministic result of the process. Element 4, packaged deliverables. Deliverables are the tangible outputs that transform an abstract service into something the client can actually hold and reference. This might include a governance charter, a team's lifecycle policy, or a security baseline report that the organization can implement immediately. These packages clarify the scope of work, which prevents the scope creep. that often destroys the profitability of a project. Because these assets are reusable across different clients with minor customization, they allow you to scale your impact without reinventing the wheel every time. Element 5. Reduced risk. Risk is the invisible force that drives clients to negotiate on price, timeline, and scope. When a client feels uncertain about whether a project will actually succeed, they try to protect themselves by lowering the price or asking for more features. You can remove this uncertainty by offering a fixed scope, a guaranteed timeline, and evidence from previous case studies. The paradox of consulting is that offering this kind of certainty allows you to charge more because you are taking the burden of failure off the client's shoulders. When all 5 elements are present, the problem, the outcome, the method, the deliverables, and the lack of risk, the client stops negotiating and starts asking when the work can begin. Element 1. Deep dive, identifying and articulating painful problems. The most valuable services solve problems that keep executives awake at night, rather than focusing on issues that just look good in a slide deck. We are not talking about nice-to-have fixes or minor inconveniences, but rather the specific points of failure that create measurable pain right now. In the world of Microsoft 365, these architectural flaws are often invisible until they suddenly transform into visible high-stakes crises. Governance chaos is the first place to look, and it usually manifests as uncontrolled Teams creation where anyone can spin up a workspace without oversight. Because nobody reviews these requests or archives the results when a project ends, the system inevitably drifts toward a state of total entropy. 3 years later, an organization finds itself buried under 1,500 teams, yet nobody can say which ones are active or which ones are leaking sensitive data. SharePoint sprawl follows this exact same trajectory as sites proliferate and abandon content duplicates, eventually causing version control to break down and data governance to erode entirely. The cost of this chaos remains hidden on the surface, but it creates a massive drag on the organization in the background. IT teams spend their limited cycles managing resources that shouldn't even exist. While storage costs climb, and e-discovery becomes a nightmare because nobody knows where the data actually lives. Employees waste hours searching for information across a fragmented landscape because the organization has no lifecycle management in place. Nothing gets intentionally archived and nothing gets intentionally deleted, so the system just accumulates digital debt that grows more expensive every day. Security exposure represents the second category of painful problems, and it stems from the fact that most organizations don't actually understand their tenant configuration. Permissions drift over time as external access is granted and never reviewed, which means users eventually gain access to sensitive resources they should never be allowed to touch. Guest accounts accumulate like ghosts in the machine, and data is shared broadly when it should be restricted, creating a false sense of security. The organization believes they have controls in place, but in reality, those policies are not enforced consistently and configurations drift away from the original intent. Compliance risk is the third painful problem that usually stays hidden until an auditor walks through the front door. Retention policies are supposed to be the guardrails of the system, but in practice, they are either misconfigured or simply not applied to the right workloads. This makes e-discovery a desperate scramble because nobody knows if the required data still exists or if it was deleted by a user 3 months ago. Regulatory exposure increases every day, the organization lacks visibility into its own gaps, and they usually only discover these failures when it is far too late to fix them. Adoption failure is the fourth problem, and it is particularly painful because Microsoft 365 licenses are a significant capital drain. An organization might deploy licenses to 5,000 users, but if 30% of those people are barely touching the platform, the ROI is effectively dead. These users have the license because it was assigned by default, yet they stick to legacy systems and email for work that should be happening in Teams or SharePoint. The organization is paying a premium for advanced capabilities they aren't using, which means the budget is being lit on fire by licenses that drive zero business value. The fifth problem involves the massive gaps in Copilot readiness that many organizations are currently ignoring. An organization decides to invest in AI, rolls out the licenses, and expects immediate productivity gains, but they forget that Copilot requires high-quality data to function. Without a clean information architecture and strict governance, the system is forced to train on messy, unorganized data, leading to chaotic results and irrelevant suggestions. Users quickly lose trust when the system hallucinates or surfaces old documents, causing adoption to stall and leaving the organization with a massive bill for a foundation that wasn't ready. These problems are everywhere, and most organizations are actually struggling with all of them at the same time. However, they rarely see them as a single integrated failure of design, choosing instead to view them as separate departmental challenges. An IT director worries about team sprawl while a security officer frets over data exposure, and the CFO focuses solely on the waste in the licensing budget. Because these issues are siloed, they are addressed piecemeal, which usually means the underlying architectural erosion is never actually stopped. The consultant's job is to surface these structural failures before they graduate into full-blown corporate crises. Most consultants make the mistake of waiting for the disaster to happen, such as a failed regulatory audit or a massive data breach, before they offer help. They wait for the license renewal shock or the executive frustration that follows a failed Copilot rollout, but by then, the damage to the client's trust is already done. When you articulate a problem in a way the client finally recognizes, you earn the architectural authority required to sell a real solution. When a CIO reads your assessment and realizes you've described their daily reality perfectly, the entire nature of the engagement shifts. Urgency appears where there was once apathy, budget suddenly becomes available, and pricing conversations disappear because the pain of the status quo has become unbearable. Element 2. Deep dive, designing clear, measurable outcomes. Outcomes are not activities, and they are certainly not a list of tasks to be checked off a project plan. This distinction is not just about word choice, it is a structural reality that determines whether a client views your invoice as a value add or a line item cost. An activity is simply something you do, like auditing licenses, deploying Copilot, or configuring a set of retention policies. These are inputs that consume time and resources, and from the client's perspective, they represent a drain on the budget that requires constant justification. When you sell activities, you're asking the client to pay for your labor and hope that it eventually results in something useful. Because that outcome is uncertain, the client will almost always try to negotiate your price down to the lowest possible denominator. An outcome is a specific business result that the client actually experiences, such as a governance model that completely halts uncontrolled teams' sprawl. This might look like a licensing strategy that cuts annual spend by 20%, or a Copilot rollout that saves every knowledge worker 15 minutes a day. These are the consequences of your activities, and from the client's perspective, they are investments in a transformed future state. Transformation justifies a premium price tag because it replaces uncertainty with a predictable, measurable result. The difference between these two approaches is subtle, but the consequences for your business are massive. A bad outcome is implementing governance, while a good outcome is eliminating team sprawl to reduce IT overhead by 30%. One is a chore, the other is a financial win. A bad outcome is auditing your licensing, but a good outcome is reducing Microsoft 365 spend by 20% while simultaneously tightening your security posture. A bad outcome is deploying Copilot, whereas a good outcome is enabling 80% of your staff to save 14 minutes of daily work time within the first 90 days. Notice how the better outcomes always include specificity, business impact, and hard numbers that the client can actually track. Measurable outcomes allow the client to calculate the value of your work before they even sign the contract, which changes the entire sales dynamic. When you promise to reduce licensing spend by 20%, the client can do the math themselves and see exactly how much money stays in their pocket. That specific number justifies the investment and makes the cost of your service feel insignificant by comparison. Let's look at the Copilot example again to see how the math works in a real-world scenario. If you enable 800 users to save 14 minutes a day over a standard work year, you are recovering 2.8 million minutes of productivity. When you break that down, it equals over 46,000 hours of recovered time, which is worth about $3.5 million at a standard hourly rate. If your service costs $30,000 to deliver, the client is looking at a return on investment that is over 100 times their initial spend. Suddenly, your fee isn't a cost to be managed, but an investment that they would be foolish to turn down. The conversation stops being about how much you charge and starts being about how quickly you can get the project started. The same logic applies to governance, where establishing a model that cuts IT overhead by 30% creates a clear path to profitability. If an organization spends $1 million a year on IT labor, a 30% reduction saves them $300,000 in the first year alone. If your governance program costs $50,000, the payback period is only 2 months and the rest of the year is pure profit for the client. That is the power of certainty, and it only happens when you stop talking about pricing and start talking about outcomes. Cost optimization works the same way because a 20% reduction on a $5 million license bill puts $1 million back into the budget. If your optimization service costs $150,000, the client recovers their investment in less than 8 weeks. At that point, your service is no longer a discretionary expense that they can cut. It becomes a financial imperative that they must execute. The specificity of these outcomes is what matters most because vague promises lead to a vague perception of your value. The more precisely you can define the end state, the easier it is for the client to justify a higher price for your expertise. Outcomes must also be achievable within a very specific time frame rather than being some hypothetical goal that might happen eventually. Whether it is 90 days or a single fiscal quarter, adding a timeline eliminates ambiguity and increases your credibility as an expert. Finally, every outcome must be measurable so the client can verify that you actually delivered what you promised. We are not looking for better feelings or improved culture, but rather quantifiable, verifiable metrics that show up on a dashboard. Once you have these clear outcomes defined, you can finally begin to design the actual methodology required to reach them. Element 3. Deep dive. Building a repeatable methodology. A methodology is not a suggestion, it is a proven process designed to strip away risk and replace it with architectural certainty. When a client sees that you have deployed the exact same framework for hundreds of organizations, their confidence shifts from the theoretical to the inevitable. They stop worrying about whether the solution works in a vacuum and start trusting that it works in the real world, where data is messy, politics are loud, and legacy systems create constant friction. This repetition is the only thing that actually builds trust. The most common trap for consultants is the unique snowflake fallacy. They believe every engagement is a one-off because every client has different needs, different cultures, and differently mangled tenants. While those details vary, the framework for solving the problem must remain absolute. Your process should be systematic, and your methodology must be consistent. The only thing that changes is the specific data you feed into the machine, not the machine itself. The M365 Value Service Framework functions as a 5-phase sequence where every step has a fixed deliverable, a clear timeline, and objective success criteria. This structure is the boundary between a professional, repeatable service and a chaotic, bespoke project that drains your margins. The diagnose phase, this first step is where you map the current state of the environment, but it is not a casual audit or a quick look around the admin center. You are performing a high-intensity diagnosis across 5 critical dimensions: governance, security, licensing, adoption, and data quality. Within 2 to 3 weeks, you deliver an assessment report that exposes every gap and security debt currently hiding in their tenant. The phase is successful only when the client finally sees their own environment in cold, measurable terms. The define phase. Once the current mess is documented, you have to decide where the organization is actually going. You cannot fix everything at once, so your primary job here is to act as a filter for high-value outcomes. Some organizations are drowning in governance chaos, while others are bleeding money through license waste or staring at massive co-pilot readiness gaps. You spend 1 to 2 weeks prioritizing these pain points to identify which single outcome will move the needle for their business. Success in this phase means leadership agrees on the target and signs off on the roadmap. The design phase. This is where the abstract goals turn into technical architecture, governance models, and specific policy sets. If the goal is stopping team sprawl, your design must include lifecycle policies, naming conventions, and retention rules that enforce your assumptions at scale. If the focus is co-pilot, you are building an information architecture and a data quality framework that prevents AI from surfacing sensitive files. So you spend 2 to 3 weeks producing a detailed design document that allows the client to visualize the finish line and the exact path required to reach it. The deliver phase. Design is just a concept until you move into execution, which is where most projects fail due to a lack of structure. This phase is about technical implementation handled through rigorous project management rather than hope or ad hoc changes. You work through fixed milestones and status tracking over a 12 to 16-week window to ensure the new state is fully documented and deployed. The goal is simple: on-time delivery without the conditional chaos of unexpected scope creep. The drive adoption phase. Implementation is never the endpoint, actual usage is. This final phase ensures that employees don't just have new tools, but that they actually understand how to use them within the new guardrails. You provide the training, change management, and metrics dashboards needed to track progress over a 4 to 6 week intensive period. Success is not defined by the go-live date, but by whether the adoption rates actually hit the targets you set at the beginning. Every phase has a deliverable, every phase has a timeline, every phase has success criteria that are objective and impossible to argue with. This is what a repeatable methodology looks like in practice. Building a system like this allows you to scale your business because once the process is documented, you can finally stop being the bottleneck. You can train delivery teams, use standardized templates, and predict your timelines with actual precision. It allows you to deliver the same high-quality result across 20 engagements as easily as you did for the first one. Clients view a solid methodology as the ultimate proof of experience. When you can articulate a repeatable process, you are signaling that you aren't practicing on their tenant. You have done this before, you have seen the failures, and the methodology is the evidence that you know how to avoid them. Once your methodology is locked in, you can start packaging those steps into products the client can actually touch. Element 4, deep dive. Packaging deliverables as products. Deliverables are the bridge that turns an abstract conversation into a concrete, tangible asset. Abstract services are incredibly difficult to sell because they are hard to visualize and even harder to scope. When you tell a client you will design a governance model, They hear a vague promise that sounds like expensive meetings. But when you hand them a governance charter, a team's lifecycle policy, and a security baseline, they have something real. They have a reference point they can actually use long after you have left the building. Tangible deliverables, remove the guesswork, and replace trust me promises with actual products. Take a governance accelerator service as an example. This is not a vague commitment to fix governance, but a productized offering with a specific set of outputs. The governance charter defines the decision-making framework for the entire tenant, while the team's lifecycle policy dictates exactly how sites are created and archived. You are providing a SharePoint structure guide and a retention schedule that act as the law of the land for their data. These are not just nice-to-have suggestions, they are the architectural blueprints the organization will operate from for years. A license optimization program follows the same logic but produces different tools. You provide a usage analysis report that exposes exactly where money is being wasted across the M365 stack. This is followed by a SKU strategy document and a cost optimization roadmap that identifies quick financial wins and long-term strategic shifts. These are implementable, referenceable products that provide immediate ROI, making the service feel like a high-value purchase rather than a sunk cost. The same applies to a Copilot readiness program. You aren't just talking about AI, you are delivering a data quality assessment that identifies the information architecture gaps that would otherwise break the implementation. You provide a governance framework for AI deployment and an adoption playbook that sequences the rollout for different user segments. These are working tools, not just a deck of slides, and they give the client a functional engine they can run themselves. Packaging your work this way serves three major purposes for your business. First, it makes your scope ironclad. When a service is abstract, clients will always try to negotiate for more, but when the scope is defined by a list of physical deliverables, the boundaries are clear. The client knows exactly what they are buying, which means expectations are aligned from day one. Second, it kills scope creep before it starts. Scope creep is an architectural erosion that begins with just one more small change and ends with a blown budget and a frustrated client. Productized deliverables create a hard wall. If it isn't in the governance charter or the lifecycle policy, it is out of scope. This clarity protects your margins and keeps the project on the rails. Third, it massively increases the perceived value of your work. A conceptual framework is hard to value, but a deliverable is something a client can hold, review, and implement. They perceive these tangible outputs as more valuable because they represent a permanent asset for the company. It is a rational recognition that they are receiving a tool they can use to manage their environment indefinitely. The secret to scaling is making these deliverables reusable. You should be building a library of intellectual property, starting with high-quality templates for every charter and policy you offer. You invest the time to perfect the template once, and then you customize it for each client. This allows you to deliver elite-level results without having to reinvent the wheel every Monday morning. Clients appreciate these outputs because it gives them independence. When your engagement ends, the governance charter doesn't vanish. It becomes their new operating manual. The team's policy becomes the standard they follow, and the adoption playbook becomes the guide for their next internal rollout. Deliverables prove your value, but that value only matters if the client believes you can actually pull it off. That is why the final element of the framework is the most critical. Element 5 Deep Dive, risk reduction through predictability. Risk is the invisible friction that determines whether a client signs your proposal or tries to gut your pricing. This is the most uncomfortable truth about service design, yet most consultants ignore it entirely. When a client negotiates, they aren't necessarily being cheap. They are trying to hedge against the uncertainty of your outcomes. If you promise a transformation but the client isn't sure you can actually deliver, they will naturally try to lower the price to match that perceived risk. Lowering the cost is their only way to ensure that if the project fails, they didn't overpay for the disaster. Uncertainty regarding feasibility is what drives people to fight you on the timeline. They have no way of knowing if your 12-week plan is a realistic schedule or just optimistic marketing, so they push back and demand buffers. They build in contingencies and plan for overruns because they don't trust the map you've given them. Scope negotiation happens because the client is guessing at what they actually need. Since they have never done this before, they try to reduce the engagement to the few parts they actually understand. They cut out what feels risky, which inevitably reduces the total value of the project. You eliminate this friction through 5 specific mechanisms: fixed scope, fixed timelines, proven frameworks, case studies, and guarantees. Fixed scope ensures the client knows exactly where the boundaries are drawn. Your engagement might include a governance charter, a team's lifecycle policy, and a security baseline, but it explicitly excludes custom development or permanent staffing. When these boundaries are clear, the client stops trying to negotiate the edges because the what is no longer a variable. A fixed timeline allows an organization to actually plan for change. They need to know that discovery happens in week 1 and implementation wraps up by week 12 so they can coordinate their own internal resources. When the schedule is predictable, the pressure to negotiate drops because the uncertainty of the when has been removed. Using proven frameworks means you aren't inventing a solution on the fly. You are implementing a system that has worked repeatedly, backed by data from organizations that have already achieved the outcomes you're promising. This moves the conversation from the theoretical to the mechanical. Case studies serve as your architectural proof. You need specific examples that detail the starting state, the timeline, and the quantified results for an organization of a similar size. When a prospect sees a peer who achieved the exact result they want, they stop asking if it's possible and start asking how soon you can start. Guarantees are the final tool, and they are where most consultants lose their nerve. They worry about what happens if the client doesn't adopt the changes or if conditions shift mid-project. That hesitation is exactly what the client feels, and it's why they'll try to grind your price down. Guarantees transfer the risk of failure from the client's balance sheet to yours. An outcome guarantee might state that you will eliminate team sprawl or reduce the fee, while a timeline guarantee promises the work is done in 12 weeks or the extra time is free. This is uncomfortable for you, but it is precisely why clients are willing to pay a premium. When you offer certainty, you remove the need for the client to protect themselves through negotiation. The consultant who quotes $50,000 for consulting will face pushback. The consultant who offers that same price but includes a satisfaction guarantee and a fixed delivery window will not. You actually end up making more money because you've absorbed the risk the client was previously carrying. These 5 elements create a service that is difficult to argue with. A painful problem creates the initial urgency, while a defined methodology and risk reduction create the certainty required to close. Together, they turn a vague proposal into a definitive commitment. Specialization creates demand, the niche advantage. Generic Microsoft 365 consulting is a race to the bottom that ends in total commoditization. It happens because every other firm is offering the exact same thing: implementation, deployment, and basic governance. When you are positioned identically to 100 other people, you are forced to compete on hourly rates and thin margins. Specialized services create demand through the reality of your expertise rather than just clever marketing. When you become known for solving one specific high-stakes problem, clients will seek you out directly. They won't compare your quote to a generalist because they recognize you own that specific architectural space. The market data on this is quite clear. While generic cloud consulting might command $100 an hour, specialized AI integration can easily pull 5 times that amount. This isn't because the specialist is 5 times smarter, but because the market recognizes them as an expert in a domain where failure is too expensive to risk. Specialization works because it allows you to stop reinventing the wheel for every new contract. By solving the same problem repeatedly, you develop a proven playbook and intellectual property that generic consultants simply don't have. This repeatable approach leads to faster delivery, which directly improves your profit margins. You also gain the ability to build proprietary tools that increase your perceived value. A specialist in Teams governance has pre-built configuration templates, while a licensing expert has custom analysis tools ready to go. These assets become a defensible advantage that a generalist cannot easily replicate without a massive investment of time. Perhaps most importantly, specialization lets you move away from hourly billing and toward outcome-based pricing. Because your results are repeatable, you can credibly promise to reduce licensing spend by 20% or hit an 80% adoption rate within 90 days. When your outcomes are predictable, your price can be tied to the value of the result instead of the time spent at a desk. Look at the Copilot readiness market as a perfect example for the coming year. Many organizations are buying licenses only to realize their underlying data architecture is a chaotic mess. The specialist who understands how to structure information so the AI actually retrieves the right data can command massive fees. They aren't just more expensive, they are providing a measurable outcome that a generalist cannot guarantee. This same pattern applies to every niche, whether it's tenant security hardening or SharePoint intranet transformations. Every one of these areas has organizations with painful problems who are tired of paying for hours and want to pay for a solution. Authority is built through this kind of focus. When you specialize, your content and your speaking engagements all point toward a single area of mastery. This authority attracts high-tier clients who value expertise over the lowest bid. These are the clients who don't negotiate on price and instead ask when your next opening is. The biggest mistake you can make is trying to be everything to everyone. Being a general Microsoft 365 expert is no longer a viable way to run a high-margin business. The market rewards those who specialize and punishes those who settle for being a commodity. Once you have defined your specialization, you can begin the process of turning that expertise into a scalable business model. This is where we move from custom consulting into the world of productization. Productizing services. Turning projects into programs. Productization is the mechanical process of converting custom manual labor into a repeatable and scalable system. It serves as the essential bridge between being a solo consultant and actually building a sustainable business. Most consultants remain trapped in the same cycle for their entire careers because they treat every engagement as a unique puzzle. They take on a custom project, staff it up, deliver the work, and then immediately begin hunting for the next one. While this generates revenue and constant activity, it offers absolutely no scalability. Because every engagement is different, the work requires your constant personal attention and cannot be delegated to a team. You cannot hire other consultants to run these engagements for you because they aren't following a program, which means they are forced to reinvent the wheel every single time. This model effectively caps your revenue at your own physical limits and ensures the business fails the moment you try to grow beyond your personal capacity. Productization inverts this broken logic by replacing the custom project with a standardized program. Instead of starting from scratch, you create a defined offering with a fixed scope, specific deliverables, and a set price. The methodology remains consistent across every client, the timeline never shifts, and the price is locked in before the work begins. You are no longer selling your hours to a client, but rather selling a finished product that happens to be a service. Consider the Microsoft 365 Governance Accelerator as a primary example of this shift. This is not a vague, custom governance engagement that might take 6 months or a year to complete. It is a productized program where the first 2 weeks are dedicated to diagnosing the current state, followed by 2 weeks of designing the model. Implementation occurs from week 5 through 12, and the final month is strictly for driving user adoption. This 16-week timeline is fixed, the scope is immovable, and the deliverables, like the governance charter and security baseline, are identical for every customer. The price for this program is fixed at $50,000, which eliminates the typical range of $150,000 to $300,000 based on perceived complexity. There are no time and materials contracts and no budget overruns to negotiate because the cost is $50,000 flat. Since the client knows the total cost and the consultant knows the exact revenue before the engagement even starts, the need for negotiation simply disappears. This level of standardization creates several positive consequences for the health of the business. First, your sales cycles become significantly faster because the conversation is no longer a complex discovery process. When you sell a product, you simply show the client the program, the timeline, and the price before asking when they want to start. Compare this to a custom engagement where you spend weeks scoping, proposing, and iterating on a deal that might never close. Productized services close at a much higher rate because the offer is impossible to misunderstand. Second, marketing becomes a straightforward exercise in showcasing a tangible product rather than a vague consulting practice. You can build dedicated landing pages, create specific case studies, and demonstrate the exact before and after states your program achieves. Being able to show a prospect the exact documents and security baselines they will receive makes the marketing much more effective than selling expertise. Third, your profit margins will naturally increase as you refine your internal execution. Because the work is standardized, you can use templates and proven processes to finish the tasks much faster than your initial estimates. Since the price remains fixed regardless of how long it takes you, every gain in efficiency translates directly into pure profit. Fourth, delivery becomes entirely predictable for both you and the client. With a fixed scope and timeline, you eliminate the scope creep and unexpected technical hurdles that typically blow out a project budget. Predictable delivery leads to higher client satisfaction, which naturally generates the referrals you need to fuel the next round of business. Fifth, and most importantly, productization allows for true architectural scalability. Because the work is standardized, you can finally train other people to execute the methodology without your direct supervision. You can hire delivery consultants and build a team because your revenue is no longer tied to your personal calendar. The program can finally scale because it no longer depends on your availability to solve every problem. Firms like Transition Technologies MS have mastered this by moving away from custom consulting entirely. They execute productized programs for Teams telephony, SharePoint migrations, and Dynamics 365 implementations using a library of internal templates. By documenting every step of the process, they have successfully completed over 800 projects with a massive team of 800 IT professionals. That is what real scalability looks like in the Microsoft ecosystem. Productization does not mean every client receives a generic, identical result. It means the framework and the methodology are standardized, while the client's specific data and configurations provide the necessary customization. The phases of the project and the final deliverables remain the same, even if the content inside those deliverables is unique to the organization. To start this process, you must follow a clear sequence that begins with documenting your existing methodology. Write down every step you take during an engagement and identify which components are repeatable and which ones actually vary. Once you find the repeatable parts, build templates for things like governance charters and lifecycle policies so you never have to write them from scratch again. Finally, bundle these templates and methods into a named program like the Copilot Readiness Program and assign it a fixed price. That fixed price signals confidence to the market and transforms your service into a high-value product. The pricing model shift from hours to outcomes. Hourly pricing is a mechanism that systematically destroys the perceived value of your work. This is not a matter of opinion, but a simple matter of arithmetic. When a client sees an hourly rate, their brain immediately performs a calculation that turns your expertise into a cost to be minimized. Cost is something to be negotiated down, not an investment to be maximized. If you tell a client that a governance engagement requires 150 hours at $120 per hour, they only see an $18,000 expense. They immediately start looking for ways to do the work faster, reduce the scope, or find a cheaper alternative. The hourly rate triggers a defensive negotiation response because the client is incentivized to limit the time you spend on the project. This model teaches clients to measure your value in units of time rather than the quality of the result. The faster and more efficient you become, the less the client actually pays you, which creates a fundamental misalignment of interests. You want to do the work thoroughly to ensure it lasts, but the client wants it done quickly to save money. Hourly pricing creates constant friction where there should be professional alignment. Outcome pricing flips this entire model on its head by charging for results instead of minutes. When you charge for the outcome, your incentives finally align with the client's goals. You both want the project delivered successfully, you both want it finished on time, and you both want the solution to be sustainable. If we look at the Microsoft 365 Governance Accelerator again, the hourly model might suggest a price of $18,000. In that scenario, the client is obsessed with the clock and constantly looking for ways to cut corners. However, if you price that same service as a $50,000 outcome, the conversation changes completely. For that fixed price, you are eliminating team sprawl and delivering a complete set of governance assets within 16 weeks. The client is no longer focused on how many hours you work because they are focused on the $300,000 they will save in IT overhead. They see the elimination of compliance risks and the improvement in collaboration as a high-return investment rather than a billable expense. At $50,000, the project is no longer a negotiation. It is a logical business decision based on value. We see the same logic in licensing optimization services. An hourly estimate might come out to roughly $9,000, leading the client to haggle over your rate. But if you offer a license optimization program for $25,000 that promises to reduce spend by 20%, the math changes. For a company spending $5 million a year, that 20% reduction is worth $1 million in the first year alone. The client isn't going to argue about $25,000 when the return on that investment is 40 times the cost. The Copilot Readiness Program follows the same pattern. An hourly quote of $30,000 will almost always be met with requests to cut the budget. But a $35,000 program that enables 80% of the workforce to save 14 minutes a day creates massive enterprise value. For a 1,000-person company, that recovered time is worth over $3 million in annual productivity. When the value is that clear, the client stops asking about the price and starts asking when you can get started. The research into this shift is quite clear, as 73% of clients actually prefer outcome-driven pricing over hourly billing. They prefer it because it allows them to calculate a clear return on investment rather than guessing at a final bill. When a client can see the financial impact of your work, they stop treating you like a vendor and start treating you like a strategic partner. Transitioning to outcome pricing requires a high degree of architectural confidence. You must be certain that your methodology works and that your timelines are accurate before you can guarantee a result. This confidence isn't something you fake. It is built by delivering the same specific outcome dozens of times until the process is second nature. You also need clear, verifiable success metrics so the client can see the outcome for themselves. Whether it is a reduction in licensing spend, a successful governance audit, or adoption numbers on a dashboard, the result must be measurable. If the outcome is provable and not subjective, the client will have no reason to question the value you provided. In almost every case, outcome pricing will increase your actual earnings because efficiency becomes your greatest asset. Since you are no longer selling your time, every hour you save through automation and templates increases your effective hourly rate. Moving from hours to outcomes is the ultimate mindset shift that turns a consultant into a high-scale service provider. The sales conversation shift from rate to outcome. The sales conversation transforms entirely when you move from hourly pricing to outcome pricing. This is not a small change, but a fundamental restructuring of what gets discussed and who actually controls the room. The traditional sales conversation follows a predictable, exhausting pattern. A client asks for your rate immediately because they are thinking strictly in terms of cost, and they follow up by asking how many hours the project will take to calculate their total spend. Once you provide those numbers and determine the budget impact, the conversation inevitably pivots toward negotiation. They ask if you can work faster, lower the rate, or reduce the scope. The entire interaction is structured around minimizing cost, leaving the consultant to defend their rate and explain why things cost what they cost. In this scenario, the power dynamic is inverted, with the client negotiating down while the consultant tries to negotiate up. This is the hallmark of a commoditized sales conversation. Now reverse that structure. In an outcome-based conversation, the opening questions are completely different. You ask what outcome they want to achieve, focusing on the result rather than what they want implemented. You ask about the financial value of that outcome, such as what it means to eliminate 30% of IT overhead. If you can deliver that result with certainty, you ask if they are committed to moving forward. Notice the shift in control. The consultant is the one asking the questions and framing the narrative, directing the focus toward business value instead of line item costs. The client stops negotiating price and starts answering questions about outcomes. In this model, you are never defending a rate because your hourly cost isn't the topic. You are proving a methodology and showing how previous clients achieved identical results. By demonstrating confidence that a specific outcome is reachable within a specific timeline, the conversation stays on capability. You also stop estimating hours and start defining success criteria. You ask how the organization will measure the achievement and what metrics will track progress. When you define these markers upfront, the engagement becomes about verification rather than guesswork. The client knows exactly what success looks like before the work begins, which causes surprise and disappointment to disappear. Price objections evaporate here because the conversation was never about the price to begin with. It was about value. Once a client calculates the return on investment and decides it is acceptable, the price is no longer a central topic or negotiable point. The only conversation left is about timing, specifically how quickly you can mobilize and if you can start next month. Here is what this actually sounds like in practice. A CIO might tell you they are drowning in Microsoft 365 complexity with teams out of control and licensing costs that are far too high. They are worried about security and compliance exposure and they clearly need help. You do not respond by saying your rate is $130 an hour for 150 hours of work. That is the commoditized response that leads to a $19,000 argument. Instead, you ask which of those problems is causing the most immediate pain. When the CIO points to licensing waste and surprise renewals, you ask how much they spend on Microsoft 365 annually. If they say $5 million, you ask if a 20% reduction in spend while improving security would justify an investment. To a CIO, 20% of $5 million is $1 million in savings. Spending $50,000 to recover $1 million isn't a difficult negotiation. It is a simple math problem. That is the outcome conversation. There is no hourly rate, no estimate of effort, and no cost objection. There is only value and timing. This approach requires you to understand the business, not just the technical stack. You have to know their annual IT overhead, their risk exposure costs, and their budget cycles. This takes research and business acumen. You have to think like a financial executive instead of a technician. You must also quantify value in business terms. Technical improvements and feature implementations don't matter as much as financial impact and time savings translated into dollars. Every outcome must be expressed in money because that is the language executives speak. Finally, this requires absolute confidence. If you are uncertain, clients will sense the hesitation and use it to trigger a negotiation. Your confidence comes from specialization and a methodology that has worked repeatedly. Service design, the M365 value service framework in action. The framework becomes real when you apply it to a situation involving a mid-market organization with 5,000 employees. They have been running Microsoft 365 for 3 years without any intentional governance, leading to uncontrolled Teams creation and SharePoint sites that proliferate without any lifecycle management. They are spending $800,000 a year on the platform and suspect they are wasting budget on licenses while their Copilot pilots fail due to poor data quality. The IT director is under pressure to fix this, and that pressure is the specific pain point you are there to solve. You begin with the diagnose phase, taking 2 weeks to assess the current state across 5 dimensions. You might discover 1,500 teams where 12% haven't been accessed in a year, or a SharePoint environment with hundreds of sites and duplicated content. When you look at security, you find broad guest access and unenforced MFA, while a license analysis shows 30% of the spend is underutilized. The diagnosis becomes clear. The organization is paying for capabilities they don't use and sitting on risk they aren't managing. Next is the define phase, where you spend a week identifying high-value outcomes through leadership interviews. The CFO wants lower costs, the CISO wants less risk, and the CTO wants Copilot to actually work. You prioritize 3 outcomes: eliminating governance chaos to reduce overhead, optimizing licenses to cut spend, and preparing for Copilot at scale. These are 3 distinct sources of measurable value. During the design phase, you spend 3 weeks creating a governance model for how Teams and SharePoint will be provisioned and archived. You establish a lifecycle policy where new teams require a business case and inactive ones are archived after 6 months. You also create a standardized folder guide and a retention schedule to meet compliance needs. This roadmap identifies exactly what data needs cleaning before Copilot can function effectively. The deliver phase lasts 12 weeks as you implement the model and right-size the licenses. You consolidate duplicate tools and establish a governance board made of IT and business stakeholders to review new requests. Instead of a random rollout, you launch a controlled Copilot pilot, monitoring the adoption and refining the approach based on what you learn. Finally, you move into the drive adoption phase from weeks 13 through 16. You train the IT team on the governance model and teach knowledge workers how to use Copilot effectively. By establishing ongoing review meetings, you ensure the model does not drift back into chaos. The results are quantified and clear. The governance model stops the sprawl, meaning the organization is no longer accumulating technical debt. Licensing optimization saves them $180,000 annually, and IT overhead drops by 25% because management is now systematic. The client perceives value not because of the technical work, but because of the business outcomes. They see lower costs, lower risk, and a strategic capability that finally works. They understand exactly what they are paying for and the return they are getting. This service is entirely repeatable. You use the same phases and the same methodology for the next client facing the same pain. The data changes, but the framework and the predictable outcomes remain the same. But none of this matters if nobody knows about it. Positioning your service. The market narrative. Positioning is the lens through which the market views your service compared to every other option. If your positioning is weak, you become a commodity instantly. If it is strong, you create genuine demand. Most consultants fall into the trap of generic positioning by calling themselves a Microsoft 365 consultant. This is a race to the bottom where you compete entirely on price because every firm claims the same expertise and every proposal looks identical. When the market has no way to tell you apart from the next person, it defaults to the only metric left, which is the lowest rate. This commoditization destroys your margins and turns your expertise into a basic utility. Strong positioning functions differently because it defines the specific problem you solve and the exact type of client you serve. Consider this. We help mid-market organizations transform Microsoft 365 from a chaotic productivity platform into a secure, governed digital workplace that drives measurable business outcomes. This statement identifies the client as mid-market and the problem as chaos, while promising a secure environment as the final result. A CIO reading that sentence recognizes their own internal pain, and that moment of recognition is what actually generates demand for your specific firm. You must understand that positioning is not just marketing copy or a clever tagline for your website. It is the architectural narrative that dictates how you structure your service, how you name your offerings, and how you price your work. Every decision you make flows from this core identity. So if your positioning remains vague, your business decisions will be equally unfocused. Your claims must also be defensible and rooted in real-world results rather than aspirational marketing. If you position yourself as a Copilot readiness specialist, you need the data and case studies to prove you have actually moved the needle for a client. Credibility comes from evidence, and without it, your positioning is just a hollow promise that will fall apart during the first technical deep dive. Different specializations require different narratives because they solve unique problems for specific audiences. A Copilot readiness specialist might say, "We prepare organizations so Copilot delivers 14 minutes of daily productivity gains instead of becoming an expensive experiment." This works because it names a specific outcome and acknowledges the very real risk of wasting money on licenses. A knowledge worker or an executive looking at that sentence sees a specialist who can prevent a costly failure while delivering a quantified win. A Microsoft 365 license optimizer takes a different approach. We turn Microsoft 365 from a cost center into a strategic investment, saving clients 20% while improving security. This appeals to CFOs because it quantifies the savings at 20% and reframes a recurring bill as a strategic asset. It isn't just about cutting costs, it is about reducing risk and improving the security posture at the same time. And then you have the team's governance expert who promises to establish governance that enables collaboration without sprawl. This is an elegant solution to the constant tension between users who want freedom and IT admins who want control. By promising both, you attract organizations that are tired of the traditional trade-off between productivity and messy environments. Strong positioning is a filter that attracts the right clients and repels the wrong ones. The clients you want are those who value certainty and are ready to invest in a transformation because they recognize the gravity of their problem. These organizations are looking for an outcome, not a discount, and they are willing to pay a premium for a specialist who understands their world. The wrong clients are the price-focused organizations that want to negotiate every line item and refuse to acknowledge their own operational pain. Your positioning should push these people away before they ever reach your inbox, saving you from nightmare engagements and scope creep. When your narrative is clear, the sales conversation shifts from a debate over price to a discussion about your methodology and when you can actually start the work. Delivery excellence are how execution builds reputation. Positioning is what opens the door and attracts the client, but that narrative is completely hollow without flawless execution. This is the exact point where most service firms fail because they build a beautiful brand and then let the positioning unravel during the actual engagement. High-value services do not allow for good enough delivery. They require a level of precision that matches the premium price you are charging. When you promise a specific outcome, you have a professional obligation to deliver it on the timeline you committed to. This is the fundamental difference between a consultant who is constantly chasing new leads and one who has a line of repeat business waiting at the door. Execution failures do more than just lose a client. They contaminate your reputation in a market where word travels fast between executives. A single story about a firm that promised governance but delivered chaos can circulate through a network of CIOs and cost you dozens of future opportunities. Reputation is a fragile asset that takes years to build and only one bad project to destroy, which is why execution is your primary defensive tool. Conversely, when you deliver exactly what you promised on the agreed-upon scope, your clients become your most effective advocates and referral engines. True execution excellence requires you to master 4 areas: timeline, scope, outcomes, and quality. Timeline excellence is often overlooked, but hitting a 60-day deadline in exactly 60 days builds immense trust with an executive team. Staying on schedule requires the discipline to say no to distractions and the project management rigor to handle unexpected obstacles without pushing the end date. When you are consistently predictable, clients begin to plan their entire business cycles around your availability because they know you won't let them down. Scope excellence means you define the boundaries of the work early and you refuse to let the project drift into unbuilt territory. Every consultant deals with scope creep, but the best ones prevent it by documenting exactly what is included and pushing back when a client asks for just one more thing. And maintaining this discipline ensures the engagement remains profitable, which allows you to keep investing in the high quality of your delivery. Outcome excellence is about moving away from hope-based results and toward measurable, verifiable facts. If you promised that a governance model would stop uncontrolled teams creation, you must prove it with a report showing that no unauthorized groups were made. If you promised a 20% reduction in licensing spend, you show the old bill next to the new one to verify the savings. Real numbers and verifiable data are the only things that prove you actually solved the problem you were hired to fix. Finally, quality excellence means your deliverables are polished, professional, and ready for immediate use by the client's IT team. A governance charter should not look like a collection of messy meeting notes. It should be a finished product that a compliance officer can audit against. High-quality work signals that you take the client's business seriously, and these documents often stay in use for years after your contract has ended. Achieving this level of excellence requires more than just a single talented person. It requires a system of project management and a team that takes ownership of the results. You are transitioning from a solo consultant who performs tasks to a service provider who operates a reliable delivery engine. When that engine runs smoothly, the paradox of the market takes over. Clients stop asking how much you cost and start asking how soon you can begin. Building a sustainable business model, scaling beyond yourself. The consultant trap is a simple mathematical dead end where you are the service, your brain is the product, and your calendar is the ultimate constraint. You can only serve as many clients as you have hours in a year, which usually means running 4 to 6 engagements annually if you work full-time on delivery. When you multiply those few engagements by your average project value, you find your absolute revenue ceiling. You hit that limit and the growth stops. While you can try to raise your prices or stretch out the timelines, you cannot actually increase your volume without fundamentally changing how you operate. This is the exact point where most consultants plateau and either accept the limit or decide to hire help. However, hiring introduces a new set of architectural failures because the people you bring on must be trained in your specific methodology. They have to understand the service and execute to your exact standards, or your reputation starts to degrade immediately. If they succeed, you've solved the scaling problem, but you've traded it for a management problem. You are no longer a consultant. You are now a manager of people. The service provider model inverts this logic by making the methodology the service rather than the individual. In this system, the team executes the process while your role shifts toward designing, refining, and ensuring that the execution remains consistent. You are building a system that can be run by competent professionals instead of relying on heroic individual efforts. Scaling this model requires 4 simultaneous shifts in your design. First, you must have a documented methodology because you simply cannot delegate what lives only in your head. Before you ever hire a single person, your entire process must be written down, covering how you diagnose, design, and implement every phase. This documentation serves as your training manual, your quality assurance checklist, and your primary intellectual property. Second, you need a trained delivery team that understands and respects your methodology. You hire people to follow the system, training them by pairing them with you on early engagements so they learn through direct observation. You gradually increase their independence until they can execute projects with minimal oversight from you. They aren't there to reinvent your business. They are there to execute the documented process. Third, you must implement quality assurance processes because consistency never happens by accident in a growing firm. You have to define what good looks like and audit every deliverable before it reaches the client's inbox. By reviewing project timelines and verifying that every phase is followed, you create feedback loops that help the team learn what works and what needs to be refined. Fourth, you need repeatable processes that eliminate the need for reinvention on every new project. Productized offerings are the core of this strategy, meaning you don't design a governance framework from scratch for every new client. Instead, you customize a proven governance template and you adapt an existing retention schedule rather than building one from first principles. This speed and consistency are what actually allow a team to deliver high-quality work at scale. A pricing model that supports team delivery is also critical to your survival. Hourly billing dies the moment you hire people because team members are expensive and carry significant fully loaded costs. If you bill their time at only twice what they cost you, your margins will be dangerously thin. Outcome-based pricing allows for much higher margins because the price is fixed, and your internal efficiency compounds directly into profit. A governance project priced at $50,000 that takes 12 weeks instead of 16 creates the margin you need to fund further expansion. Systems and tools are what enable this consistent delivery as you grow. Project management software, document systems, and communication tools standardize how work is organized and tracked across the board. These platforms create visibility into what is happening across multiple engagements at the same time. They allow you to scale the business without losing architectural control over the quality. You should consider business model options that align with your specific market opportunity. A solo consultant model keeps you as the primary bottleneck but maximizes your margin on every single engagement. A small team of 3 to 5 people balances growth with control, allowing you to stay directly involved in most of the work. A productized service company systematizes everything from pricing to delivery, which can scale to hundreds of projects but requires a heavy investment in infrastructure. Finally, a partner ecosystem model allows you to design the services while others deliver them, though this requires very careful partner management. The market data on this is unambiguous. Firms that systematize their pricing and delivery consistently outperform those relying on heroic effort. Systematized firms enjoy predictable margins and can forecast their future revenue with a high degree of accuracy. Because they know they can deliver at scale, they can confidently invest in marketing and sales to keep the pipeline full. Heroic firms live from project to project, existing in an unpredictable state that makes it impossible to invest in growth. Your chosen model must align with the opportunity you see in the market today. If you are a solo consultant with highly specialized expertise, that model can generate an excellent personal income. If you have identified a repeatable service with massive demand, a small team model is the right way to capture that growth. If you have fully productized a service and the demand is substantial, a productized company model is the best way to own that space. The 2026 market context makes this choice very clear for everyone in the ecosystem. Between Microsoft pricing changes, the rush toward Copilot, and the general governance chaos, there is massive demand for specialized Microsoft 365 services. The opportunity is real, but the question is whether you are positioned to capture it alone or if you need to build a team. Your answer to that question will determine your entire business model. The psychology of high-value services. Why clients buy premium offerings. The most successful Microsoft 365 consultants do not actually compete on technical skill. While the struggling consultant and the thriving one can both architect systems and understand governance, those technical skills are just table stakes. They are expected, not a differentiator, and they won't help you stand out in a crowded market. The real differentiator is that successful consultants compete on clarity, outcomes, and reputation. They have worked to eliminate ambiguity from their process, whereas the struggling consultant still operates in a cloud of uncertainty. Ambiguity always leads to negotiation and price grinding, while clarity tends to eliminate those friction points entirely. Clients do not buy services based on the lowest price, which is a fundamental truth that most consultants fail to grasp. Instead, clients buy based on confidence and their desire to reduce risk within their organization. When you offer a high degree of certainty, clients are willing to pay premium prices to get it. When you offer uncertainty, they will negotiate, delay, and eventually look for a cheaper alternative. The confidence equation is actually quite straightforward for any service provider. Perceived value is the result of methodology clarity, outcome specificity, risk reduction, and a proven track record all working together. If you are missing even one of these elements, the entire equation collapses and your value drops. Methodology clarity means the client understands exactly how you are going to solve their specific problem. You aren't being vague, you are telling them that you diagnose in the first 2 weeks and design in the next 2. By the time you reach the implementation and adoption phases, the client sees a structured plan from someone who has clearly done this before. Outcome specificity ensures the client knows exactly what success is going to look like at the end of the road. You aren't promising general improvements, but rather a finished governance model or a 20% optimization in licensing costs. When the client can measure exactly what they are paying for, they feel much more comfortable signing the contract. Risk reduction means you have successfully transferred the uncertainty of the project from the client over to yourself. By using fixed timelines, proven frameworks, and clear guarantees, you protect the client's downside. This protection is exactly what justifies premium pricing in the eyes of a corporate buyer. A track record proves that you have delivered these exact results for similar clients in the past. Through case studies and quantified results, other CIOs can see their own success reflected in your previous work. When all four of these elements are present, clients with painful problems will happily pay double or triple the commodity rate. They aren't doing this because they have money to burn, but because they have calculated the return on investment. They have decided that paying more for certainty is a much better deal than gambling on a cheaper, unproven option. A client facing $500,000 in licensing waste will gladly pay $25,000 for a service that actually fixes the problem. They aren't paying for your hours or your technical effort. They are paying for the $100,000 in net savings you provide. They are paying for the certainty that those savings will actually show up on the balance sheet. Similarly, a client facing the chaos of a Copilot rollout will pay $35,000 for a structured readiness program. They have already seen other pilots fail because of poor data quality or missing governance, and they understand the cost of that failure. They are willing to invest in the certainty that their organization won't become another cautionary tale. The consultant who regularly publishes content on Microsoft 365 governance is always perceived as more valuable than the one who stays silent. Speaking at industry events and documenting case studies isn't about manipulation. It is about building legitimate authority based on real results. This authority creates the certainty that clients are looking for when they have a high-stakes problem to solve. When you remove uncertainty from the equation, you also remove the client's need to negotiate with you. It is a counterintuitive paradox, but the consultant who offers the highest level of certainty can always charge the highest price. The consultant offering low certainty is forced to negotiate, and the one offering no certainty loses the job entirely. This is the real reason why you build frameworks, specialize in a niche, and document every part of your process. You aren't just creating marketing materials, you are creating the certainty that eliminates ambiguity for the buyer. You are transferring the risk to yourself and building services that clients don't want to argue about. They don't negotiate, they commit and ask how soon you can get started. That is the entire game of high-value consulting. Once you understand this psychology, your entire approach to the business will shift. You will stop trying to convince people to hire you and stop positioning your services based on a list of technical features. You will stop competing on price and start building certainty through clarity and proven results. Clients with real pain and real budgets do not need to be convinced of your worth. They need to be certain that you can solve their problem, and when you provide that certainty, they buy. 2026 market context, why this matters now. The market conditions are no longer a matter of debate. Microsoft 365 pricing is climbing across the entire ecosystem, with increases ranging from 5% on enterprise suites to a staggering 43% on frontline worker plans. These changes take effect July 1st, 2026, and because Microsoft officially announced this shift back in December, we are now watching the rollout happen in real time. But the sticker price isn't actually the most disruptive part of this transition. The real structural shift occurred in November 2025 when Microsoft quietly eliminated volume discounts for enterprise agreements. The tiered discount structure that shielded large organizations for decades has simply vanished, meaning companies that once enjoyed 8 or 10% discounts now find themselves starting at level A with zero relief. For an organization managing 25,000 seats, this isn't just a price hike, it is a total collapse of their established cost model. The inevitable result is renewal shock. When you combine the higher list prices with the loss of legacy discounts, many organizations are staring down effective increases of 40 to 50%. A mid-market IT director who budgeted for a modest bump now has to explain a massive deficit to a CFO who wants answers immediately. The mandate from the executive suite will be predictable: find alternatives, slash licenses, or negotiate a miracle. This specific pain point is exactly where the architectural opportunity lives. This market moment creates three distinct pathways for service providers. The first is license optimization, which is becoming a survival tactic for organizations desperate to trim the fat. Most companies are paying for seats they don't use, users on tiers they don't need, and tools that overlap with 3 other things they already own. A consultant who can audit this waste and recommend specific downgrades or consolidations is delivering immediate hard dollar value. You can position this as a $30,000 program that recovers $300,000 in waste, making the math an easy yes for any frustrated stakeholder. The second pathway is Copilot readiness. Organizations are pouring money into AI, but they are doing so with a deep sense of dread that the investment won't actually move the needle. They have seen the failed pilots and they understand the risks, so they are looking for someone who can provide architectural certainty. If you can assess data quality and build a governance roadmap that hits 80% adoption in 90 days, you are solving for fear rather than just technology. Delivering 14 minutes of daily productivity per worker is a measurable outcome that the market is currently starving for. The third opportunity lies in governance transformation. As cost pressures mount, organizations are finally realizing that Wild West collaboration is an expensive liability they can no longer afford. Uncontrolled teams creation and unreviewed external access aren't just messy, they are entropy generators that create massive security debt and IT overhead. The new requirement is for governance that actually enables work instead of just blocking it, turning a nice-to-have policy into an essential business function. The timing for these services is perfect because the pain is active and unavoidable right now. Organizations are currently trapped in budget cycles and renewal windows where they are forced to reassess their entire Microsoft 365 footprint. They are open to these conversations because the financial pressure is real, not theoretical. Consultants who can articulate these specific outcomes will find themselves in high demand, while those still selling implementation hours will watch their margins disappear. This shift isn't waiting for 2027, it is happening in the next 6 months. The organizations making renewal decisions today are motivated, they are desperate, and they have the budget to invest in anyone who can stop the bleeding. The market window is open for now, but it will eventually close. If you move quickly and specialize in one of these high-certainty outcomes, you will likely have more business than you can actually handle. Those who wait will be left to compete in a commoditized market where price is the only lever left to pull. The choice is binary. You either evolve your service model now, or you accept the race to the bottom. The contrarian insight. The fundamental shift. The most common mistake in the Microsoft 365 space is the tendency to sell technical labor instead of business outcomes. It is an easy trap to fall into because most consultants spend years building deep expertise in architecture, security, and complex migrations. You are proud of your certifications and your ability to solve difficult problems, so you naturally assume that this expertise is what the client is paying for. That assumption is actually a liability that commoditizes your service the moment you speak. Expertise is abundant, and there are thousands of other consultants claiming the exact same skills and offering the same list of capabilities. When you sell based on what you know, you are forced to compete on price because the client sees no meaningful difference between your expertise and the next person's. The contrarian insight that changes your entire trajectory is simple. The most successful consultants don't sell expertise, they sell certainty. Certainty is the single scarcest resource in the world of enterprise technology. Most clients are currently drowning in projects that slip past their deadlines, blow through their budgets, and deliver features that nobody actually wanted. In their world, scope creep and unmet expectations have become the normalized standard because these organizations have been burned so many times, they are willing to pay a massive premium for a guaranteed result. When you offer a fixed scope, a proven methodology, and a guaranteed outcome, you are providing something far more valuable than technical skill. You are effectively transferring the project risk from the client's shoulders onto your own, and that transfer of risk is exactly what justifies premium pricing. You aren't just another pair of hands. You are the person who ensures the problem actually goes away on schedule. This shift from expertise to certainty changes every part of your business at the same time. Your sales conversations move away from hourly rates and toward the actual return on investment the client can expect. Instead of haggling over how many hours a task will take, you are discussing the financial impact of the result. The client stops looking at you as a cost center and starts seeing you as a strategic asset. Your pricing model also moves from hourly billing to fixed fee engagements. Instead of trading your limited time for dollars, you are trading a specific outcome for a set investment. This creates a powerful incentive for you to refine your process and eliminate waste, because the more efficient you become, the higher your margins grow. It is the exact opposite of the broken incentives found in traditional hourly consulting. Your service design will naturally shift from custom, one-off projects to a productized approach. Instead of reinventing the wheel for every new client, you are applying a proven framework and a set of playbooks that you know will work. This consistency is what allows you to scale, moving you away from being a solo operator and toward becoming a true service provider. Your market positioning also becomes much sharper. You are no longer just doing Microsoft 365. You are the person who solves Copilot readiness or handles license optimization for a specific industry. That level of specificity eliminates the vast majority of your competition. When you solve one problem exceptionally well, you no longer have to beg for work. The data backs this up, as research shows that 73% of clients actually prefer outcome-based pricing over hourly models. Specialized firms consistently command 2 to 3 times the rates of generalists because they offer a repeatable methodology that works. The evidence is unambiguous. Clients don't want to buy your time, they want to buy the confidence that their problem will be solved. When you design your practice around certainty rather than activity, the nature of your client relationships changes. They stop asking about your hourly rate or how long a project will take, and they start asking how soon you can get started. This isn't about being a better salesperson or having a more magnetic personality. It is about architectural clarity. By removing ambiguity and eliminating risk, you make the decision to hire you an obvious one. The client isn't negotiating with you at that point, they are committing to a result. This shift is the ultimate leverage point in your career. Once you stop selling labor and start selling certainty, you move from a struggling consultant to a thriving, high-demand provider. This leads us to the final step, how to actually apply this framework to your own practice. Your next step, the playbook application. The framework is now in front of you, and the 5 elements are clear. You know how to identify painful problems and define outcomes, and you understand that building a repeatable methodology is the only way to package deliverables effectively. This shift from selling expertise to selling certainty is what allows you to reduce risk through predictability. You understand why specialization matters and why outcome pricing works, but the real challenge is application. Understanding a system is not the same as executing within it. The path forward consists of 5 concrete steps that you can complete in 90 days if you maintain your focus. Step 1 requires you to choose your specialization. Most consultants fail because they try to be everything to everyone, but you must pick one specific problem to solve exceptionally well. Whether you focus on copilot readiness, license optimization, governance transformation, or security hardening, you must choose one. This choice is not a permanent life sentence because you can always evolve later. For now, you are going deep into one architectural area rather than remaining shallow across many, because specialization is the only way to escape commoditization. Step 2 involves designing your service using the 5-element framework. You must define the painful problem you solve and the specific outcome you deliver, while also mapping out your methodology and deliverables. This documentation is your service architecture. It is the blueprint for what you will market and exactly what you will sell to the enterprise. Step 3 is where you document your methodology. You need to write it down and create the templates, frameworks, and playbooks that constitute your intellectual property. This documentation is what enables you to scale and what your team will eventually execute. If a process is not documented, it cannot be delegated, and if it cannot be delegated, you will remain the bottleneck forever. Documentation serves as the bridge between being a simple consultant and becoming a true service provider. Step 4 is about building your case studies. You need to execute your service for 2 or 3 clients so you can measure outcomes and document the results. Quantifying this impact provides your proof of value and gives prospects the reference points they need to trust you. 1 case study is just an anecdote, but 2 case studies start to show a pattern, and 3 case studies serve as architectural proof. Step 5 is positioning your service in the market. You create content around your specialization and speak at events to build thought leadership, which is how real demand is created. This does not happen through paid advertising or desperate cold outreach. It happens through authority and by being known as the person who solves one specific problem better than anyone else. A 90-day timeline is realistic for this transition. You spend the first 30 days choosing your specialization and designing the service, followed by 30 days of documenting your methodology and creating templates. The final 30 days are for landing your first client and executing that first case study. The resources you need are limited to your expertise, your time, basic documentation tools, and one willing client. Your investment is minimal if you handle the work yourself, or moderate if you hire help to support the delivery or documentation process. The expected outcome is a productized service that clients value, that you can scale, and that commands premium pricing. The alternative is a slow decline into architectural erosion. You can continue selling your life by the hour, negotiating over price and waiting for random projects to materialize. That path leads to competing on commodity terms, which is a race to the bottom. The market is moving toward outcome-based services, and the consultants who move now will thrive, while those who wait will simply fade away. The final truth. The most successful Microsoft 365 consultants do not actually compete on technical skill. They compete on clarity, outcomes, and reputation. These architects design services that solve painful problems with absolute certainty, and they charge premium pricing because clients perceive premium value. They have clients asking when the work can start instead of asking how much the hourly rate will be. This is not magic, it is architecture. It is a service architecture that aligns perfectly with what the client actually needs. If you apply this framework, you will build a service that the market values. When you build something that clients truly value, the dynamic shifts in a fundamental way. They stop negotiating your price and start negotiating your timeline. That is the only game that matters.